From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Manveen Rana.
Well, there isn't rugby without a party, and this one is ready to go. Chart-topping singer.
Women's rugby is having a moment.
Oh, I'm the psycho. Women's Rugby World Cup 2025!
The Rugby World Cup is here and the North East is out in full colour.
It's absolutely amazing. The turnout for the girls are absolutely fabulous.
The tournament hosts, the tournament favourites, the world number one, have laid down the gauntlet for all comers, all challengers. England, simply superb.
Having won every match they've played in the tournament, the England team head into the Women's Rugby World Cup final tomorrow with every chance of a victory. But why has it taken so long to shine a light on the women's game? Will tomorrow's match change everything, or could its legacy be squandered? And if this weekend is your first foray into the world of rugby, do not fear. We'll tell you all you need to know. The story today: why everyone is suddenly watching women's rugby.
When this tournament's over, who will history remember?
The opening night game in Sunderland at the Stadium of Light was just a historic occasion for rugby and women's rugby, because more than 42,000 people were there in Sunderland. It's a stadium that doesn't normally host rugby, a part of the world that's not associated with rugby. It's a football ground.
That's Elgan, Alderman, one of our sports reporters and the co-host of the Times rugby podcast, The Ruck.
The fact that they were able to command a big football stadium up in Sunderland on an opening Friday night of a women's rugby game was something that a lot of people thought they would never see in their lifetime.
Elgan, for those who think they don't care about rugby, why is this weekend such a big deal?
We're expecting a sellout 82,000 crowd at Twickenham, the home of English rugby, for a Women's World Cup final, which is an occasion that even 3 or 4 years ago seemed like it just simply wasn't possible. For this final to have been sold out before the tournament even started, for 82,000 people to be there, to crown what is already a record-shattering Women's World Cup. They've already been 3 times as many tickets sold for this World Cup than the previous one 3 years ago, which was itself a record tournament. It's just a huge watershed moment for women's sport. And for England fans, they're hoping that they can finally get over the line and become world champions.
So women's rugby, and England women's rugby in particular, is actually having a moment. It really is. It feels like people are watching in numbers we haven't seen before. It all culminates this weekend. For those just catching up, tell us, when are they playing? Who are they playing? What do we need to know about the final?
England, who are commonly known as the Red Roses, will be taking on Canada, 4 p.m. at Twickenham. It'll be live on BBC One. It's the world's number 1 and number 2 ranked sides. Different stories behind these two teams. England embraced professionalism earlier than any other nation. They've been fully professional for the past 6, almost 7 years now, which has enabled them to become the best team in women's international rugby. But then you've got Canada, which is a country that struggles much more with having a domestic league, where you've got some amateur players still in the team. But even though they are world number 1 and world number 2, the story of these two teams is that you've got an all-conquering professional team against a team that people are marketing as these plucky underdogs, even though they would never regard themselves as that.
Call them underdogs, call them dark horses, no way. Call them Rugby World Cup finalists. Dominant, brilliant, ruthless, efficient.
So this is actually a sport where England really are the strongest side. I mean, give us a sense of their history, their record coming into this game. How strong a team are they?
England have always been a very good women's international rugby team, but the advent of full professionalism at the start of 2019 was a real turning of the corner. And since July 2019, they've won 62 of their past 63 matches. They went on a world record 30-match unbeaten run, which guttingly ended in the last World Cup final at Eden Park in Auckland. I was there at that match, and they lost the line out. The game ended. New Zealand had won. Since then, they've now won 32 games in a row. So they've broken their own world record of 30 wins in a row, currently on 32 in a row. Like I say, 62 of their past 63. The big question is, can they win the one that matters on Saturday?
And do you think some of its sudden popularity, is any of that influenced by, the success of the Lionesses and the fact that people just seem to be looking at women's football differently?
Certainly at the start of the tournament, the phrase "Lionesses moment" was never far from any Red Roses' lips. They were in training camp while the England women's football team were competing at those Euros, and every now and again you'd see a video of them cheering on a penalty shootout or something like that in camp. So they have spoken at length about being inspired by what the Lionesses have achieved. I think that any expectation that we will see an exact mirroring should be tempered simply by the fact that football is a bigger fish in English sport. But when you look at it and you think that what the Lionesses have achieved in having a branch of the London Overground named after them, the TV appearances, the BBC Sports Personality of the Year, etc., the Red Roses team are also champions of Europe and have most recently lost a World Cup final. So they have the similar status to the Lionesses. That's why they need this World Cup win to really cement what they have achieved, to have this feeling that England women's sport is on this sort of crest of a wave at the moment.
And just explain for people who haven't been following it, why is Canada, even though it does seem to be such a strong side, why is it seen as almost the underdog?
Canada suffers in professional sport by dint of not having its own professional league. By sheer geography, it's such a large country that doesn't have a huge amount of resources behind it. So their best players have to go to England or France to play semi-professionally. The Rugby Football Union, the English governing body, reports revenues about 20 times greater than that of Rugby Canada. So that's the difference in finances.
And is it true? I mean, they even had to crowdfund their way here.
Yeah, so the head coach, Kevin Rouet, said, this is what we need to win the World Cup. And they said the budget for that is 3.6 million Canadian dollars. They had 2.6. So they thought, right, we need to find that $1 million from somewhere. So they launched a fundraising campaign called Mission Win Rugby World Cup 2025. Businesses, donors came together. They made up that shortfall, and it means that Canada had the money they required for them to win the World Cup. It's not mission turn up and have a good time. That's how much they believe they needed win the World Cup. And as they've progressed through this tournament, they've shown that on the field they would be deserving winners.
Give us a sense of how this tournament so far has played out. Give us a sense of the vibe. If you've missed the matches, if you're coming to it new this weekend, what have you missed?
Because every time these big crowds turn up, these big TV audiences turn up, and because it attracts younger audiences, more children, it is viewed as almost more of a festival. So even though we took 4 weeks or so to get to this stage where there were 4 genuinely competitive teams, we've seen the likes of Brazil scoring a try and celebrating like they've won the World Cup itself. We've seen Samoa kicking a penalty against England and celebrating like they've just won the World Cup. These are teams that don't have any professionalism at all and are just delighted to be there. They want more opportunities. So it very much started with that sort of atmosphere, and then the past 2 weeks, it's turned into a genuinely exhilarating contest on the field.
It sounds so joyful. I keep hearing also, and you're going to have to explain where this sits on the great Venn diagram of life, but tell me where rugby meets crochet.
Rugby meets crochet very much in the England Red Roses team. They have taken crochet wholesale into their hearts. Abby Dow, who is one of the England wingers out wide, is a staunch advocate of crochet, and she's always creating things and handing them to opposition players and referees as little tokens of the match that's happened.
She crochets for the opposition.
Yeah, she hands over some little gifts of things that she makes, little jerseys, that type of thing to opponents.
This is definitely a very different vibe. During the course of that tournament, joyful and then exhilarating, we've also just seen the audience numbers rocket. Give us a sense of the numbers around this tournament.
The total ticket sales are approaching 450,000, which is an increase on the previous record from 3 years ago of 140,000. So that's more than tripled. We've had peak TV audiences on BBC One of more than 3 million for the last 2 England games, which is an England record. In France, we've had peak audiences of 4.6 million, even bigger than in England, which is a record in France too. So it's just completely blown all the previous ticket sales and TV records out of the water. And on the Ruck podcast a few weeks ago, we spoke to Sarah Massey, the managing director of the World Cup, and she talked about how they speak to fans that come out of the matches and find that a lot of them have never come to a game before. So hopefully the tournament has been attracting new families, new people.
I mean, we know that 30% of people that are coming to the matches have never been to a women's rugby match before. So we know how many new audiences we're attracting into it. 90% of the people that are going to matches would definitely go and experience and want to experience another women's rugby match again. So that's only good for the future globally, because not only have we had people from around the country here, we've had obviously some international visitors as well.
And Elgan, our listeners will have many who have followed rugby all their lives, but there will be people who are coming to this as part of that tidal wave of sudden interest in women's rugby. Some who will be watching for the first time this weekend for this massive final at Twickenham. Can you give us a very quick, very brief Bluffers guide to the players? Who are the important England players everybody should just be aware of?
The England star of the tournament really has been Megan Jones, who wears 13 on her back usually. She talks in a Welsh accent. She was born in Cardiff. She's got Welsh and English parentage, but she's been absolutely brilliant in the backline. She has been nominated on the 3-woman shortlist for World Player of the Year for 2025. Behind her at fullback, wearing the 15 jersey, you'll have Ellie Kildare, very distinctive by her blonde, curly hair, her will-o'-the-wisp running. She is the reigning World Player of the Year. She maybe hasn't quite reached the heights in this tournament that we expect from her being England star, but then after being injured in the final pool stage match, she came back in the semi-finals and scored 2 thrilling tries, so she's back on form as well. She'll be one to watch. The England captain, Zoe Aldcroft, a real workhorse. She's not necessarily the most gregarious of individuals, but she's a real workhorse on the field. She'll be leading the team, probably wearing the number 6 jersey. And then credit to Canada as well. They have maybe the actual best player in the world, who is their second row forward, called Sophie de Goody. She's the daughter of 2 former Canada captains.
Wow.
She is one of the 3 women nominated for World Player of the Year, and she is one to watch, not only because she does everything that one would expect of a player in her position, but she's also Canada's goal kicker, which players who play in the pack, in the forwards, don't normally do. It's not really the equivalent, but it's sort of like if you imagine a goalkeeper taking penalties or free kicks. That's in football.
And
that's
being annoyingly good at it.
That is, I suppose, the closest perhaps example we could say to what that's like.
And for people who are in the pub watching this, again, not necessarily experts, just give us a couple of, like a little glossary. Give us 4 or 5 words you can throw in to make it look like you know what you're talking about.
A great thing would be to always refer to the laws of the game rather than rules of the game, because that really sets you apart as a real rugby nerd. If you say, I think you'll find they're called laws, not rules in rugby. That's certainly one way to do it. Yelling something like, go for the posts, take the points whenever someone gets a penalty near the try line. That's a great way of showing yourself as a real purist. Otherwise, just familiarise yourself with terms like scrum, line-out, maul. Those are the set-piece basics of any rugby match.
Elgan, we've been talking about how well women's rugby is suddenly doing. It's having a moment. It's suddenly in the spotlight in a way that it hasn't been before. Take us right back to the beginning. I mean, how long a story is this, the story of rugby? Where does it begin?
Rugby football is called rugby football because it is the form of football that was popularised at rugby school. You may, if you've ever gone to rugby in the Midlands and wondered, isn't that the name of a sport? It's because it was the form of football played at rugby school in the 19th century. 1871 was the first international rugby game. That was between England and Scotland. So international rugby in the men's side has been around for 154 years, whereas the women's international game has only been around for 43. So quite a head start for the men over the women. Many people may not be aware that there are two versions of rugby around the world, but especially in the UK and Australia primarily. It all comes down to there was a great schism in 1895, and it was a very social schism. It came about because players from Yorkshire and Lancashire, who often had industrial jobs, they were playing rugby on a Saturday, and they needed what they called broken time payments. They didn't necessarily want to be paid to play, but they were having to leave work to play, so they wanted money to compensate for that. The powers that be in the Rugby Football Union, often down south, maybe not industrial workers, couldn't countenance that at all. For them, it went against the amateur Corinthian ideals of what it meant to be a gentleman playing sport. So the Northern Union, primarily Yorkshire and Lancashire, split away for that ideological reason about whether or not you could deserve payment for playing rugby, essentially. The difference that came 100 years on from that schism in 1995 is that rugby union, which had remained an openly amateur sport for 100 years, finally went professional, and that robbed the league really of its trump card. And ever since then, union has grown to become comfortably in Britain the bigger of the two codes of rugby. And league has struggled really since then, and has struggled to break away from its heartlands.
So that's a brief potted history of rugby, of it starting in rugby school, splitting into league and union. All through this period, what's happening to women? When do they become a part of the game?
There are stories throughout that time between 1871 and 1982 of women playing rugby, but for understandable, societal reasons of the time, it was regarded as, not a feminine thing to be doing, not too masculine a sport.
From Virginia to Ada, Ada to Elsie. Off it goes again. Oh, the weaker sex. Martha kicks off. The ball's taken by Hazel. She's had her hair waved for this match and looks just too stunning.
And many people who will have tried to play will have found that they were perhaps stopped from playing. In about the sort of second half of the 20th century, it starts picking up more. A lot of it comes through the universities in England and people starting up teams there.
When 16 university ladies' sides battle it out for the first time, there'll be rucks and mauls and scrums and no tears, just excitement that ladies' rugby has at long last made it big.
And then the first international game of women's rugby union takes place in Utrecht in Netherlands in June 1982 when France play Netherlands. And thereafter, a Great Britain team forms and they play a few games against France. And then Great Britain separates into England, Scotland, Wales, and there's an Ireland team as well, which takes in Northern Ireland. And then in the 90s, that's when it really takes off. In the past 34 years, we've had the progression of these. We're now in the 10th World Cup. We've got to where we are now, but yeah, it's taken 34 years to get to that stage in the World Cup sphere.
And it hasn't been easy for the women involved.
There are myriad stories of England players who are driving all around the country, who are organising international fixtures for themselves, who are, of course, doing so as complete amateurs and, maybe having to pay to play or pay to drive themselves to games, no form of payment whatsoever. For a time, England weren't allowed to wear the official rose that they now have, that the men's team have as well.
We played in men's kit. There wasn't women's kit at the time. I'm 5'1". I had to cut off the bottoms of the shirts and my sleeves.
Of course, there will have been people who viewed rugby as not a sport for women to take place.
I can remember people calling us freaks or calling us weird.
So they will have been not allowed into clubs or not allowed into clubhouses, etc. But all these women just kept on playing and kept on organising fixtures.
It was incessant, but we loved it when we played.
Until, we've got here to today where, on Saturday, 82,000 people turning up to watch them when they would have started just playing on little fields around England where the number of spectators might have been under 100, just friends and family and no one else.
It is an extraordinary tale, how they got here. Even now, though, we shouldn't sort of pretend it suddenly reached its absolute height. I mean, how much will those players on Saturday, how much are they being paid for this?
The RFU salaries are believed to be in the region of £40,000, £50,000 a year, but an elite international men's player can expect to earn a large six-figure salary in comparison, approaching £1 million, etc. So it's still not at that same level, but as we say, this is a very early stage in professionalism. The fact that they earn a wage at all to play professional rugby is something that even 15 years ago wouldn't have been on the radar, I think.
Is there still pressure on them in terms of social attitudes? I mean, even in the course of this tournament, we did see quite a lot of abuse directed at a Welsh player for wearing fake eyelashes and a bow, as if that was completely unacceptable for somebody playing a sport.
Yeah, Georgia Evans, the Wales back rower, she often plays with a pink bow in her hair and does her eyelashes up. And for her, it's just a case of wanting to look good when she plays rugby, wanting to look how she feels comfortable when she takes to the rugby field. And people inevitably on social media have unnecessarily harsh views on that when it's just someone being themselves. And she put out a powerful statement just saying, this is how I feel comfortable. It's not up to you what I look like when I play.
Hi, I'm Georgia Evans. The bow that I choose to wear in my hair has no bearing on my ability, my passion, or my fight for this game of rugby. I am known for wearing my pink bow. I've worn it since my first cap and I will continue to do so.
And one thing about the women's game is that it does have a really big social media profile, and it's one area where it can outgrow the men's game in that regard, because it's not bound by centuries of what it means to be a rugby player. They can sort of plough their own furrow in that regard. But opening yourself up to social media, as we all know, does also open yourself up to some of the less positive signs that are out there on the web as well.
Although she seemed to have really turned it around. I think she was even handing pink bows around.
I got emotional today seeing everybody with their bows. It was insane. Thank you for the support. It's not just about me wearing a bow, it's what it represents. It's everything about rugby.
It does feel like the popularity of women's rugby is sort of slightly changing the way we talk about women too. Part of the body positivity movement, I suppose, which has been happening for some years now, but suddenly to see sort of, a muscular woman, they're being talked about in the commentary as being so strong, and that's seen as a good thing, which isn't always normal in society.
Any discussion around this has to feature Ilona Maher, who is the American rugby player who has broken out into American sport in a way that no other rugby player, male or female, has been able to. And she did that off the back of her body positivity content on Instagram and TikTok.
I feel like every time I open up social media nowadays, I'm hit with an ad for a weight loss supplement, or I see a thin celebrity is even thinner. And here I am with another gentle but firm reminder that it is okay to exist in a bigger body.
That got to people that don't normally follow rugby, but they're seeing something they haven't seen before. They're seeing something that looks a bit different. She's not even the best player in the USA team necessarily, but she's taken rugby to a place that no one else has been able to and become a real sporting celebrity in the USA.
The Women's Rugby World Cup this year, probably a lot of you didn't know, the biggest event in women's rugby, starting in about a month. Watch it, tune in. You're not going to understand it the first time you watch it. You're not going to understand it the second time either, but just keep watching, okay?
When she came over to play in Bristol for 3 months at the start of this year, Bristol had to move their game to a bigger stadium because so many people wanted to come see her. So she is a real draw. That body positivity, a big amount of that comes from her, but she's by no means the only person doing that. You've got people like Sarah Byrne, the England tight head prop, talking about deadlifting more than 200 kilograms, that type of thing.
So it's all kicking off tomorrow at Twickenham. We know how long it's taken women to get to this point, to have such a spotlight on the sport as they're going into the final. We also know everything won't be cured come Sunday morning. What can you expect after this match? What is the legacy of this moment?
Hopefully the legacy will be more boys and girls turning up at rugby clubs. And I think if England are world champions at the end of the match, then that is something tangible that the RFU, that women's rugby, that Britain can really hang their hat on more than if it's another galling defeat. You'll see it in perhaps bigger crowds at domestic rugby, in the Premiership women's rugby, but also when the Red Roses are back in action in the Six Nations in 2026, when they're back at Twickenham for a standalone fixture, how many people turn up? Will it be in the 40, 50,000, which we've seen before this World Cup, or will they be able to sell it out again for another Women's Six Nations Games? There is so much scope for growth in the women's game, and people are always, World Rugby, the governing body, often saying it's actually the women's game driving the men's game because it is coming from this low level. And with things like social media, it is actually able to take rugby to new places that the men's game maybe can't, because it is so entrenched. That's what we hope to see, and we hope to see, countries that aren't just England, New Zealand, France. We hope to see more from Canada. We hope they get greater investment so they can grow from this as well. Countries like South Africa, so established in the men's game, they've recently started to care more about the women's team, and they reached the quarterfinals for the first time. So it's what other countries can do as well if they see the example of what England have managed to do, whether they win the final or not, and hopefully try and follow them on that journey to make elite international women's rugby even more competitive than it is already.
That was Elgan Alderman, a sports reporter at The Times and one of the co-hosts of The Times rugby podcast, The Ruck. And they'll be dropping an emergency episode dissecting the match and everything around it on Saturday evening. Now would be a good time to subscribe. The producer today was Shabnam Grewal. The executive producer was Taryn Siegel, with special rugby insights from Kate Lamble. And sound design and theme composition by Mal Assetto. Thanks for listening, and enjoy the match.